Okay, you're live.
Good evening and welcome to the August 17th Dublin City Council work session. As you know, we are doing this remotely in this era. Now have the privilege of being able to hold our meetings remotely and are taking advantage of that this evening in an attempt to keep everyone safe. With that, Jenny, would you please call roll?
Vice Mayor DeRosa,
Here.
Mr. Keeler,
Here.
Ms. Fox,
Here.
Mr. Reiner,
Here.
Ms. Oludo,
Here.
Mr. Peterson,
Here.
and Mayor Ambrose Grooms.
Here, thank you. Homer, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mayor Grooms, I think you're still muted.
Sorry about that. This evening we have our 2020 CIP documents before us, and I believe that the general has some opening comments for us. So please, Dana, take it away.
Well, good evening, members of council, and thanks for your time this evening, for your consideration of this five-year capital improvement program and budget, and for any direction that you'll provide us as we move forward towards the adoption of this five-year program. I'm pleased to present, in accordance with the revised Dublin Charter, a proposed five-year capital improvement program, and this would be for years 2021 through 2025. We previously provided you the list of capital projects submitted by staff. We do our best to monitor and to try to include what we think we've heard from City Council since the last CIP budget regarding any priorities and or ideas that you all may have regarding capital project needs. Staff's observations and input from the public through our own interactions are certainly included, as well as our asset management and assessment processes that we use to update, particularly as it relates to our maintenance program that's a part of this capital budget. We conduct safety assessments and address concerns that we are aware of or that have otherwise been brought to our attention. Obviously, potential economic development opportunities are a part of this as well, and so forth. This is not to say that this proposed program has everything in it. We're trying to do our best to include any and everything that we're hearing about or seeing or aware of. I'm sure you'll have some ideas of your own and other priorities that you'll obviously establish through this review process, but this is our best attempt to pull all that together, assume an appropriate level of expenditure based on your own policies and our estimation of revenues. And then we try to prioritize within that and set forth this five-year capital program. You'll recall Matt Stifler reviewed with you last week our revenue estimates and debt profile, so you had that as background. We provided you the CIP budget, the five-year program document, and a copy of this presentation for tonight, which we recommend we use to guide us through our discussion. As you know, we've not only have tonight's work session scheduled, but we also have another one scheduled for September the 8th, should you need that, and also begins at 6 p.m. on September the 8th. The introduction of the 21 to 25 five-year CIP budget and ordinance will be introduced at your August 24th meeting next Monday, and we have the second reading scheduled for September 28th. That gives us time for additional meetings and the ability to turn around any changes to the proposed budget that you want us to undertake. Obviously, too, there's time for other meetings in there if you so choose, but we wanted to at least get that much on your calendar for now, and then we'll adjust as needed as you go through this process. So Matt Stifler, again, has put together the presentation for tonight. And again, this is just a little bit of an overview, but which you pretty much already heard, but he's also, this is similar to what we've done in the past, and it provides just a guideline for us to progress through the budget and to sort of invite your comments or guide the discussion, if you will. I do have quite a bit of staff here on the call. If you want to ask them any questions. I'll certainly rely on them, as will Matt, for some of the details as we go through. I want to thank them as well for joining us tonight. And I'll thank everyone in advance for all the hard work that has gone into putting this together and for the hard work that we'll do in the next couple of weeks to get this resolved and figured out. So with that, thank you all. And I'm just going to, if it's all right, Mayor, I'll hand it over to Matt, and then he could share his screen and start to walk us through.
Thanks, Dana. Welcome, Matt.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Council. Good evening. So as Dana mentioned, this is our first workshop. We have several other events scheduled, but tonight we're going to go over a high-level overview pretty quickly and then get on to the discussion of the projects contained in the proposed CIP. There are additional hearings scheduled, at least one on September 8th, and we do plan on passing the proposed CIP at this time, tentatively by September 28th. So despite the challenges and uncertainty of our current economic environment, we believe that this CIP is supportive of the city's strategic focus areas, particularly those that center around the city's fiscal health and economic vitality. With regard to fiscal health, the CIP proposed is in compliance with the adopted policies regarding our debt and income tax allocation. Additionally, we've been particularly successful in this CIP in leveraging additional resources, including grant and developer contributions for some of the projects contained regarding economic development. With regard to economic vitality, this CIP focuses on investing in infrastructure that will be used for economic development opportunities, which we expect will lead to a growth in our income tax base in future years. As has been our past practice, this CIP continues our investment in our existing infrastructure, as it is essential that we do not let our previous capital investments deteriorate at the expense of new assets and new infrastructure. To quickly recap, this slide was in last week's presentation. Total revenue, total resources are just over $240 million. And recognizing that that table on the right can be a little difficult, we have that information presented graphically. As you can see, income tax revenue remains the largest source of CIP funding. Grants and developer contributions are actually second in this CIP at just over $32 million. And as you can see, there are various other sources that fund this CIP. Our projects are segmented by department and then categorized as either maintenance or new enhancements in infrastructure. And this is done to ensure that maintenance projects are not compromised in order to fund new improvements and new enhancements. In total, this 5-year CIP proposes funding for maintenance in the amount of $81.6 million and funding for new infrastructure in the amount of $151.6 million. And you can see this breakout by year in the proposed CIP totaling $233.2 million. Breaking down this maintenance a little bit farther, you can see that this graph displays the maintenance project funded by department. And you can also see that our primary focus is on transportation and more specifically, maintaining our streets and parking lots. As council is aware, maintenance projects are always cash funded and the city does not issue debt to fund maintenance projects. This pie chart reflects the distribution of our enhancements in new infrastructure and assets. Again, the largest portion is transportation projects, with streets and parking taking up a majority of the funding. With regards to these new infrastructure items and assets, of the $151.6 million in new infrastructure, $20.4 million is proposed to be funded through debt, including park and sewer projects. Next, I'd like to take a quick look at some of the financially noteworthy projects in this CIP as compared to the prior CIP. So this slide displays new projects or project increases of over $500,000 from the 2020 to 2024 CIP. And essentially, this slide is designed to be the 2021 CIP at a glance in regard to what has changed in a financially significant manner from the previously approved CIP. I'm not going to read through each one of these projects at this time. The purpose is really to act as a review and reference to see some of the larger and more noteworthy changes that are proposed in this CIP as compared to the prior CIP. As we move on to discussions, a note of housekeeping. So this This presentation will follow along very closely with the binder that was provided to you last week. If you open up the binder and move to slide 4, you will see this slide. And I realize in this format, it can be a bit busy, but in the binder or electronic format, it'll contain this information and then the project information behind it. So in order to facilitate this discussion and proceed with some efficiency, I won't be reading the information on each slide as it mirrors the information that was in your board pack and in the binder that was provided last week. As you can see, the information is color-coded according to the legend in the upper right-hand corner of the screen to further assist in your review, as projects may have increased, decreased, or moved since the prior CIP. As we progress through each new slide, I'll provide you with any noteworthy information regarding the funding sources for projects listed, and you'll have the opportunity to ask the directors gathered here tonight about projects in their particular area. With regard to this first slide, the administration's allocations, all funding on this slide is provided through the Capital Improvements Fund, except for the allocation associated with parkland acquisition, which is provided by the Parkland Acquisition Fund. And with that introduction complete, myself and the other members of staff gathered here tonight are prepared to answer any of your questions with regard to the administration's projects in the proposed CIP. And I'd like to start by asking if there are any with regard to the allocations presented.
Hey, Matt,
Yes,
could we ask a general question on some of the previous slides before you go to this one?
absolutely.
Could you go to slide 8? Thank you. I thought it might make sense to just spend a couple minutes on this. I thought it was interesting when I reflected on really how the overall money is spent. And I know one of the big conversations, and we can talk a little bit about it later tonight, is about, being the most connected and, having a technology focus, et cetera. And I see that we're spending about, 2% on technology compared to some others. And I just thought it was interesting. And I know we don't have some prior years before us here, but when we just look at the overall allocation for our enhancements, such a lion's share certainly on transportation, but when we look at facilities at 1% and technology at 2%, I just thought it was interesting for the next 5 years. It's all about transportation. And I just, maybe at the end, we could come back and sort of look at this balance, but holistically, it gave me a little bit of pause and said, that's why I liked the slide and thought to myself, is this the share we might wish to have just in total? And I just thought I'd put that out there and we could come back to it perhaps after we talked about the pieces and the parts. I don't know if, Matt, if you had any comments on that.
No, I don't have any comment, but that is, obviously we spend a lion's share, a majority even on transportation related projects.
This is Dana.
Way
I'd
more
like
than the lion. Almost the whole zoo, right? The lions, the tigers, and the. It was just an interesting observation that perhaps after we go through it, we could come back and ask ourselves a couple of those questions. So thanks, Matt.
Dana, did you have a comment or, okay.
I'll wait till later. Thank you.
Okay. Going to proceed to the allocations. Were there any questions on allocations or shall we move on? Whoops, sorry about that.
Matt, will we have any carryover in land acquisition, or is that going to be the limit? So
There will be some carryover throughout the 2020 CIP, and then any of that carryover would be returned to the fund balance for use in future years. And I do expect some carryover in land acquisition in 2020 and probably in some of these future years. This is really a placeholder so that if we decide we need more right of way, or if we decide to purchase some property, that there's at least the start of an appropriation towards those acquisitions.
I'd be interested in land acquisition of what we might have carry over and perhaps put that in the 2021 allocation. Just so that we have, some opportunities, be able to capitalize on some opportunities as they present themselves.
And the parkland acquisition, $750,000 appropriation, that doesn't represent the whole fund. If there was additional parkland, we would be able to increase that appropriation. I think the fund balance is around 2.2 million. So there's an opportunity there for parkland, but for obviously other land acquisition, we could increase that.
Matt, I wanted to ask you about a bike share. We did the bike share earlier on. It wasn't really very successful. I'm just curious what staff was looking at in developing a new bike share program. Not that it's a lot of money, but I'm just kind of curious as to what direction that's going to go, because it wasn't used the way we thought it would be used. And is bike shares definition going to be different, going in a different direction?
Sure, I can start to answer that, and if I get anything wrong, Jenny Roush can help me out. But I believe that $50,000 allocation is an allocation for any matching grants or startup money that might be needed when that new direction is determined. That $50,000 is supposed to act as the money available to get that project started when that direction is kind of finalized.
Okay, so it's kind of like a placeholder for any possibilities that kind of bike mobility might offer. It's kind of what we're saying.
This is Dana. That's true. And it does have some specific money in there to start to establish some bike stations. And I know that Nick and the staff had been in conversation with another potential provider. And I think as a result of COVID, I'm going to say we didn't quite get probably this year to where we wanted to get to, given where we wanted to put those stations. So I think probably calling that a placeholder at this point is probably a good way to look at it based on what we know from this other group that we were going to work with.
Okay, thanks.
I think that's really an important part of the future of Dublin. And I see there's a new bike company that I was surprised way over in Linden. There was 4 bikes parked in front of our business out front on the street. So this is really an important part of the future of Dublin for people to access the restaurants downtown. So I'm glad this placeholder's in there, and I still see it, as I always have, as a major factor in the quality of life for our people. So I'm all for leaving.
So Matt, under the mobility initiatives, I don't see it broken down. I see the list of programs in there. Is under the workforce shuttle and the senior commuter shuttle, are we assuming that there will be grant dollars? Or are we assuming no grant dollars in that program?
I'd ask for Jenny Roush to
Sure, I can help answer that. Again, we would continue to seek out grant money that's there, and even with our CIP funds that we have now, we rely on the grant. So I would definitely see that as part of it, given that we don't know the state of things in the future. I can't answer that 100%, but that would be the goal, is to pursue that money as well. Sometimes we have to have matching funds then to do that. So this would allow us to continue that.
So of the 400, how much is allocated to that activity?
We didn't break it down at this point, as far as I know, but we can look into that and see if there's maybe some logical breaks in that and how we would anticipate that based on our current usage of the CIP dollars. We could look at how that could break down and provide that back to you.
Well, I was just trying to understand if we're looking to grow the program, keep it status quo, et cetera. And again, don't need to know that tonight, but I know one of the challenges, of course, has been in this time. It's been hard to really understand the viability just given the situation. So are we increasing, decreasing, or whatever? Just curious.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Yeah, no, I mean, categorically, we would be looking to increase the program, but you're right, we have had some challenges given our current status.
Yeah, the other thing I would add too on some of these light items like this is, sometimes we don't know what we don't know. So this is obviously the budgeting process, but some of this we're holding flat to show that we're trying to sustain the program. I think once a program becomes more realistic, or we actually know what some of these more futuristic type programs are going to look like, then we will be able to, in the out years, be more specific about what some of those costs will actually be to continue to construct, if there's that involved, or sustain the operational cost. But generally speaking, from a budget perspective, we're holding some things, consistent across the years to show that we're trying to sustain those to the extent that we can against all the other requirements we're trying to budget against.
Dana, are we still trying to up our ante in our bike program? I know we've worked on this for years. We've done a great job. We haven't moved up another notch, and I guess we are tied with a number of other cities. But we were fighting over the year. The next initiatives for way, and is that our share and our mobility initiative to see if we still are going to set our city apart according to bicycle use. Is that still burning in the back office over there?
I believe it is, John. I believe that staff anyway remains committed to looking at all the different mobility types that are out there. And as we continue to expand road systems and the like, we're always incorporating that sort of thing. Probably the thing we've got to look at the most is true commuter biking. And of course, that's probably only going to be as good as we're hooking into systems outside of Dublin as well, because we import jobs as much as we export. So I think your point relative to the greater connectivity is important, and how that's being treated external to us, and how are we influencing that with some of these corridor studies that are going on through MORPC and others when we look at multimodal type of mobility initiatives that are going on.
Okay, continuing on to city facilities. All of the projects in this category are funded through capital improvement fund dollars. And if there are any questions, facility staff is available to help answer them.
The log cabin rebuild, I'm just kind of curious. It's not on this one. It was on last year's in 2024 for 100. That's on another page, isn't it? Did that change the price of that? And I know we're looking for grant dollars too.
It is. It's on the parks page and it's 400,000, and that $400,000 appropriation is contingent upon inclusion in the state capital grant, the state capital bill. It's anybody's guess as to whether that bill will actually take place this year. But if that funding does become available, that's what it would be utilized for.
Yeah, I guess that's the curious part, is that last year when we estimated what it would cost to rebuild it, we said somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 to 110, and now it's 400. It's still a log cabin. It hadn't changed its shape or form. It seems like that might be a little bit on the high side, maybe.
Matt Ehrman, do you want to address that?
Yeah, when we originally did the cost estimate for rebuilding that cabin, it was literally for reassembling the pieces as they were. After further evaluation, we looked at this as an opportunity for us to increase the use and the public interaction with this cabin by making it publicly accessible. And by making it publicly accessible, therefore the price increase, as well as, pathways to the cabin, interpretive signage and landscaping that's appropriate.
That's great. I know that, we won't dwell on it. That's something that I think that's going to be a great community conversation, because that cabin is so significant that how we use it, suggestions by the community on how we use it, and by the schools on how we might use it, might drive that vision. So I'm hoping that if we have that in here as a placeholder, that can be a good conversation mat in the future with schools and parents and students.
Hey, man, I had a couple questions about the rec center update. In our current CIP or last year's CIP, we had like $350,000 to fix the chiller, I guess, air conditioning chiller units. That's been removed. Was it done, or we don't need to anymore, or what happened to that? And then second, no upgrades to that facility till beyond 2025? Just interested in that.
Sure, I can speak to the chiller upgrades, and maybe Matt Ehrman can give you an update on the DCRC actual location upgrade. But yes, both chiller units were completed this year, so they were removed from the future CIP as they're both done and have been upgraded.
So why is the 2020 a 0?
This has to do with the DCRC update, not the chiller replacement. So the chiller replacement line was removed entirely. So I guess it's project specific, and this has to do with the update project, not the chiller project.
Okay, so can you give me an update on why that's now entirely outside the window?
Well, I believe as we left it last year, we were looking at the fee structure that was adjusted to help raise funds for replacement and upgrade of the DCRC. So I think we're waiting to see how that's going to happen. So we have not programmed upgrades. I mean, obviously this year is a strange year, and it's not being used very much either. I mean, it's being used, but not the level it normally is. So so from that perspective, we're not seeing those revenues come in that were intended to help that upgrade.
Sure, I can see that the revenues aren't coming in, but I find it hard to imagine that over the next 5 years, in some of these outer years, that we're not going to have to do something to it. I mean, we had talked last year about the lockers, the restrooms, or just a variety of things that I just wondered if it's just, even if the revenues aren't materializing this year, I mean, we're going to have to do something, are we not, in later years? Or I know we spoke a fair bit about it. There's quite a long list last year.
Right, that was still supposed to be part of that overall DCRC upgrade package. We did have, and Matt maybe can help me remember, we did have some funding to try to study what a replacement program would look like. Was that reflected in this last year, or we're in and out year? Maybe I'm missing it. Maybe it's under the rec center fund.
Hey, Dana, this is Brian. There was $350,000 in this year's budget to look at a study to upgrade the facility.
And again, the idea there was to try to get a handle on the, get an architect on board, start to look at what those costs would be. And we haven't completed that. I don't see us completing that this year, frankly, with all that we've got going on.
Okay, well, I just wonder if it's realistic to have zeros all the way out. I'll leave it at that, because I think we should look at that.
And again, I think that would be under we would want to relook that. Is it, Matt, Stifler, is this the place for it to be, or should it be also back in the rec center fund?
This would be out of the rec center fund, but it would be a facilities project in that fund. And I think the thought process would be if we were able to quickly turn the corner and get revenues above 50% as soon as possible, and a funding stream would become available, then this could be moved up accordingly. But under the current policy and current revenues, that's not where we're not where it's at.
Is it possible to look at the 350 that we had set aside for a study and just put it in here for any maintenance needs this year then? or in the next year, at least having that money available for contingencies until we move forward and know what we're going to be doing long-term.
Brian, you conduct maintenance on the facility. This would reflect significant renovation, I guess is what we're really talking about.
Yeah, this was more for updating the look of the facility. We did spend roughly $500,000 this year replacing the 2 chillers. We have $300,000 budgeted for next year to replace the large air handling unit that provides air to the leisure pool. So we're continuing to make some maintenance improvements, but the $350,000 was looking more at some of the aesthetic, just freshening up the aesthetics of
You know, included in this, would this be equipment upgrades as well? Machines and things of that nature? Or those out of a separate budget? Or are those not considered capital improvements?
Yeah, those are out of the operating budget.
Replacement life is shorter than it would be for CIP.
Then perhaps maybe it would just make sense to sort of give us an overall update as to what we're doing maintenance wise, future enhancements wise. Because how old now is the rec center?
26, 27 years.
Yeah. So, you know, I think to think we're not going to have to do something for 5 years is just, again, trying to get those numbers a little more in the outer years.
Well, I guess what I would suggest is we certainly make a mark on the wall about this. And after we get through the budget, you're probably going to have at least 3 or 4 things like this that you're going to want to circle back on and go, okay, do we want to move some things up? Do we want to take on more of a major project, or how soon? So why don't we mark this one as one of those and have the collective discussion on if you want to tackle that. And again, there are those operating type dollars that we use to maintain facilities and keep things fresh and up to date as much as possible. But yeah, the wholesale what I would call a renovation and significant upgrade to it would come in this line item here. So if you want to take a look at how we stand at the end of the budget, and one of 2 things, either take money in from reserves or something like that, leverage that against potential revenues down the road, and or delay something else in order to do that. It's kind of discussion that you could have at that point.
Thank you.
Dana, can you give a little explanation in the parks on facilities about the farmhouse and the house renovations, barn repairs, kind of what you have in mind there? Because I know that there are people interested in that.
You talk about that on Shire Rings Road?
Yeah, the one on Shire Rings.
Yeah, so there is some money in this year's budget, which is a carryover to try to at least get the roof and the box gutters replaced so that rain doesn't, affect that building or water get in it. It's actually, in fact, we were just there a couple of weeks ago walking through it. It's pretty amazing shape given the condition of those. So I want to make sure we get that done. We also have some dollars over the next 2 years programmed for some renovation of the building, just meaning general cleanup, exterior work to that building, just to ensure that we keep it in a good enough status that it's not going to start deteriorating on us. Some of that's already happening, obviously, and to clean the site up. And in the out years, we did put $500,000 in to consider the possibility of a replacement maintenance facility to move the maintenance operation for the golf course out of that barn, because it is a historic barn. And I just have concerns about, in the long run, that barn, continuing to be used for that purpose. So something to talk about relative to that site and how much you want to preserve that or not.
Right. In January, when we had Ballantrae over at the council meeting, some of the things that we talked about were those very things about cleaning up the site, getting the house in order, landscaping, buffering, all of that. So as we go forward on that, I think it's going to also be important to know what that maintenance, the new maintenance facility you're talking about, what that looks like, where it's going. You know, that's going to be a big topic of conversation over there, as it should be probably. So yeah, I think it's important that we do get those that, especially the barn and the house, back into good shape. I mean, we're responsible for it, so I like that. Or were you still thinking about using that as a smart house center? I know you talked about that at once. Time, does this allow enough money for that?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're contemplating, but I think as far as allowing enough money would be as part of the renovation, just to ensure that the building's electric is up to code. And then we really want to keep the building in the same condition, or not same condition, but same footprint that it is, and not overly renovate, you know what I mean, to make it something
Right.
that's too much. But the idea of really trying to seek more so sponsorships or leveraging some of the smart cities type funding there to allow people to come and demo their smart cities type products.
Okay.
And that ties into the 33 corridor, the mobility corridor, the connected and autonomous vehicle corridor, and all of that. So that's a definite possibility. That's still unfolding, but we got to get the basics in place first, and really stand back and assess, can we really, make that happen, probably in year 2.
Right. Yeah, and there's probably good possibilities for matching grant dollars through the Ohio History Connection. I think for something of that kind of nature, with that sort of property, we can look into that with planning.
Yeah, I think to do that without ruining the historical attributes of the building is, what we would try to do.
Moving on to fleet, the projects in this division are also entirely funded through capital improvement dollars. And are there any questions on the proposed fleet projects? Okay. All right, with regard to park projects, the majority are funded through the Capital Improvements Tax Fund. There are a few that are funded through TIF funds, and that notation is in the project description. You can see here, IGS Park under new infrastructure has TIF next to it, denoting that it is funded through TIF funding. There are several projects that have funding sources that are worthy of special note. With regard to the historical cabin relocation, we touched on this a little bit earlier, reconstruction. That project is budgeted $400,000 in 2021, and the funding is dependent on the project being included in the next state capital budget bill. If the project is not included in the state capital budget bill, or if there is no bill, then that project will not proceed in 2021. The DAC, the Arts Council site renovation, was budgeted $75,000 in 2021 and $475,000 in 2022, payable from the Hotel Motel Fund. The $75,000 is for design costs and is a new cost from the prior CIP. The $475,000 in 2022 contains $360,000 in unfunded revenues based on the assistance provided to the Arts Council in 2020. As we move forward through 2020 and 2021, the ability of that fund to sustain that appropriation and the identification of those dollars will be done at that time. Additionally, Riverside Crossing Park is budgeted $4.5 million in 2021 and $6.5 million in 2025 in debt funding, as well as design costs in 2024 of $1.125 million that is cash funded. Historically, the city has not used debt to design fund, but it is absolutely an allowable cost. So that is an option should council want to proceed in that manner. We've funded it here with cash, but if council wants to move that project forward, it is an option to debt finance those design costs. The $4.5 million programmed in 2021 is the remainder of the $7.5 million that was programmed in the prior CIP. So we took $3 million of that and moved it forward, as you're all aware, to the 2020 debt offering. So that 4.5 is the balance of that project. The costs in 2024 and 2025 are associated with an expansion of the Riverside Crossing Park. The amenities associated with this project are outlined outside of the 5-year planning window in the prior CIP. So this proposed CIP brings the project into the 5-year window for council's discussion and direction. The main component of that expansion in 24 and 25 is the Promenade project. So with that, I'm available to answer any questions as well as additional park staff.
Hey, Matt, I had sent an email, the council, I'd sent Matt an email earlier tonight and asked him if we potentially wanted to move up the work on that park that's now scheduled for 2024 and 2025 forward, and potentially, instead of debt financing this $4.5 million next year, actually cash finance it. Would that be an option? So I guess one of the questions I would ask is, what flexibility might we have in the timing if we wanted to advance some work on that park?
I think how I would phrase this question is, if there's a clear direction that this project is desired to be advanced, and I know that general fund revenue, general fund reserve revenue is on the table. If I know that parks projects, the delaying of other substantial parks projects is on the table, we can come up with a policy recommendation that would do that. I don't want to say that what you're proposing isn't the first several steps of that process, but it might not be the end. There's a lot of interlocking revenues. So I'd like the time to kind of explore this and maybe find potentially more creative ways to identify the revenue necessary. The limiting factor in this budget, just so we all kind of understand the playing field here, the limiting factor in this capital budget is in 2023. You can see on the resources page that the fund balance at the end of 2023 is $50,000. So anytime you want to move money across 2023, that's going to be your problem. You're going to have to find a dollar for dollar offset that goes the other direction across that year. So you can move money from 21 to 23 with little problem, but moving it across 23 is the limiting factor in this particular capital budget. But I think if I know what's on the table, I can craft a policy recommendation that would meet those specifications.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Matt. I think it would be worth discussing rather than, the park has some momentum going here, rather to wait, we finish this and then we wait 3 more years to actually do that next phase. And so, for instance, there's Kaufman Park in there, which would be in 2022 and 3, right? 2.2 million. I just wonder if there's not some flexibility to advance that work and maybe move some of the other back. So I would like to see that. I guess I'm bringing that forward because I think that would be an interesting conversation. So that's sort of my point of view on that.
I guess I think it's a good point, really. What I don't understand is, the limitations of what we're doing right now for that park. But I do think, that's a worthy goal to try to move that up. I have another question on the bike track at Avery Park. Was that that was an older initiative, wasn't it? Did that have something to do with cyclocross and some other things we were working on, Dana? Do you remember?
It does. Matt, you might want to, if you want to talk to that, and we can go back to the Promenade project.
Yeah, just real quickly, you'll recall the cycle track that was built. Gosh, I don't know when it was. It was many years ago out at Dari Field to accommodate a certain number of competitions out there. That has since really not been used all that much. There's been a recent fairly large outcry for the use and the idea of installing what's called now in today's world a pump track. If you've ever seen these, they're very, very popular.
Right.
expos and conferences and things, and they are going up all over the country. And the advantage of these things is you can move them, you can reconfigure them, you can relocate them, you can take them out and store them. They're very versatile. And I like the idea of this because we can move it from park to park potentially, rather than it being stationed in one area around the city, giving all the residents the ability to bike to it and use it rather than having to drive. For instance, the skate park is a fixed asset and a destination. So this would give some interesting new options for the cyclists out there.
You know, another thing, Matt, that was interesting about, I guess it was 10 to 12 years ago, we were trying to track the cyclocross people who had weekly races and get them into Dublin. And we had a whole discussion on how to get the cyclocross, because they weren't settled really in any one particular area. And that still would be a good initiative as far as heads in beds possibly for their tournaments. And really requires not a whole lot of stuff, but just basically some grass and slopes and a track laid out. And I don't know if we should be talking to our tourism department over this or not, but I noticed in working with those people, they were hoping that, you know, Dublin would sort of get involved in this. And really, it's pretty much like Spartan Run, if you ever watch that, where you just sort of lay out a track, only they do it on bicycles and they jump over steeplechase things and sometimes ride their bikes through fire and all kinds of stuff. But it's pretty neat group of people. And one time we did have them attracted over here, and we did put them on the slope over there by the rec center. And so, you know, it's another possibility for future involvement of other athletic venues in our community.
Yeah, I've had conversations with our friend, Mr. Maloney over at Metro Parks. He has an interest to install such a track over at Glacier Ridge, but I don't know where he is on funding or idea at this point.
Yeah, his staff is telling me that he is now totally involved in the kayaking quarry thing. That's where their money's going to be spent from now on, and they're going to be focused on developing that as a multi-sport facility. So I bet my guess is that that's fallen by the way now. So if we're picking that up in or something like that in the bike track thing, you know, that could be good.
I see in here some platform tennis dollars appropriated. Can you, I know that we built some platform tennis facilities. Is there this need for additional ones? And I know the ones that we built were tremendously expensive. Are these proposed ones follow suit?
Well, this is a follow-up to our attempt to actually build our first one, and the price tag came back more than twice of what the estimation was. And the contractor that was supposed to do the work eventually could not provide the financial backing to get the appropriate bonds towards the project. So we have started over with the new funding mechanism to try to get that project revisited. We have been receiving a lot of outcry for a lot of, I'll just call it racket sports, whether it be platform tennis, which is a year-round opportunity, to pickleball, as we know is a very popular thing right now. And certainly our tennis enthusiasts out there are still asking for additional courts, particularly in a bank that they can conduct leagues. So combining all of this into one area in campus, it provides that opportunity.
Matt, what's coming first? Is pickleball coming first? What's planned for construction coming up this year or next?
We are pushing and pushing and pushing to get this design into bidders' hands this fall for the pickleball courts to start construction. We've been very closely working with Jim Thompson, who's been a very active participant in this and has quite a large following with the leagues that we currently have at the rec center and others. So he's been very much involved with this, with input from that group. So some of that has slowed us down, but some of that has also given us better ideas. So we're still moving forward for this year.
Oh, good. I have a question to both you, Matt, and Dana. I noticed in here that there's a lot of design work scheduled over the next few years. And it's design work that is planned for areas that abut each other. And most of it is streetscapes. I'll give you an example. Franz Road, Bridge Street landscape design, the Riverside Park Promenade, and the West End, the John Shields Plaza, and the East Bluff access. And then additionally, Teller Flats being driven by development. And because of the fact we're looking at this 2035 framework plan in ways that we're thinking into the future, I'm wondering, as we kind of move forward and think about these designs, whether or not the conversation maybe should begin to explore the possibility of a master design through the central core of the city, so that we're not designing one street, doesn't have any cohesiveness or coordination with the adjoining street. Then we move into Bridge over, through the historic district over to the Riverside Park, which is fairly fully designed, but still has work to do. And John Shields Park has no design. I'm just wondering if there's this is a fairly lengthy area of public realm. I'm wondering if there's any efficiencies or cost savings in doing a master public realm landscape design, streetscape design.
Sorry to pull a Fred Hahn, but yes.
Okay. I mean, this is this is much bigger, but I'm looking at $1 million here and $1.5 million over here and $1 million over here. And I'm wondering, is there an efficiency to, and Dana, you've gone through some of this before. I'm just, as you've done these big thoroughfares and things like that, this public realm is so important and we all see big voids. Can we realize cost savings by looking at it holistically?
Well, I think you're right about that. I think sure you can. Anytime you're joint purchasing or joint bidding something, the only caution that I throw to that is you get more of the same. So, you do want to kind of look at things a little bit differently, and you want to recognize the character that you want to have.
Yeah.
There's not that you can't have one person doing that, and we can certainly, depending on the timing of this and how they're laid out, take a look at that sort of one approach designer. But, I think we've also heard from councils past and maybe even present that if you over-rely on one, you get more of the same. I mean, I would, even refer to Councilmember Reiner and Mayor Ambrose Grooms on that, who make a living at this. No offense to our landscape folks out there, but I think that's something you just want to be a little bit,
Right.
But anyway.
And I want to hear what the others.
That is yes.
Yeah.
But it's how much of the same you might want. So that's all.
Yeah. One of the things that I would ask the other council members, and we don't have to talk about it now. I would like to talk about it when we do the 2035. The one thing that I've noticed in the plan as we're going forward in planning is lots of times the public realm ends up being the follower of development instead of the public realm laying a standard for development. Especially I think about Bridge Street and I think about Franz Road. If we have well-designed streetscapes, as John, you have mentioned in the past, these boulevards set a standard and then development tends to want to meet it. And that's why I'm wondering if this isn't a conversation that we might want to have as we go into retreat. So just some thoughts as I saw that design work money.
Well, remember too, we identified a couple of years ago, might have been the first year on council, that we had that discussion about trying to drive that very thing to some of our more tired areas of the city where we do need to rotate some things out and probably make them more of a priority, as long as we're not designing and building things that we would throw away later, or
Right.
we can leverage into new development and get it achieved as part of that as well. So that's always something to keep in mind.
Yeah. It's a lot of money. I think it's worth the conversation. Okay.
Yeah, Dana, and it's important. I mean, I don't want to put it on the back burner because I think it's really important. And that is the Franz Road improvements, because for landscaping and I mean, that particular street after all these years, and it's nothing. But is just scream. I hope we can keep that in the forefront of the mission to improve the streetscapes and aesthetics of our city. Thanks.
Dana, do we have anything in this portion of the budget for what we were looking at, the 161 entry off of 270 in that France Road? Do we have anything in this for those items we talked about?
I believe we do. Matt, can you answer that?
From a very large perspective, I think there was a certain component, the larger perspective of getting something done was put on hold. So what we have done was some minor improvements that would take very little impact if there were some substantial improvements in the area. That was done 2 years ago. The stretch between 270 and all the way across the 161 bridge to the roundabout. Dane, I think you're muted.
I muted myself. I think there was a larger project, as Matt refers to, I believe, there on 161, right, Matt, that would have provided more walkability from the corner of 161 in France going back east along the front of the shopping center there. And I think we were proposing that at one point to do that because, I mean, the likelihood of that shopping center redeveloping in the near future, somebody may make a fool out of me sooner rather than later when it comes to that, but all indications we've had in talking to those folks is it's not going to be in the near term that you'll see a redevelopment of that corner. So how do we make the best of that for walkability and tying in sort of the metro center towards the historic district? Obviously you can take Corbin's Mill, but to bring people around the other way and with the parades and things we have to make it a little more friendly. I think we actually had the money in the budget and then it was removed at one point, but I don't know, Matt, if you remember that. And I don't know if the numbers that are in this budget are approaching some of that improvement, is it not?
Yeah, they are. They're actually programmed in 2023 with the design in 2022 to involve retaining walls and shared use path and relocation of stormwater to create exactly what you just described.
Yeah, I think it's real important as we go forward that we have an understanding of what the whole core of the area is going to look like. So it isn't, we don't piecemeal the landscaping and the streetscape. And I would lean to Chris and John for advice on this, but I think it's something we need to think about before we just do pieces and parts, because I think it's real important. And I'd like to hear, maybe not now, but in the future here shortly, what planning has to say about the possibilities of this.
I would also maybe see us look at the enhancements, expansion of Kaufman Park versus the Westbridge Street 161 interchange and what everyone feels like the priorities are on those. For me, the priority would be more in this gateway issue of 161 than it would be replacing some of the wooden poles and things that we include in the descriptions about the Kaufman Park expansion. So maybe we have some
Chris, I'm having trouble hearing you.
Okay. Maybe we have some prioritization issues with respect to the 161 streetscape versus the Kaufman Park expansion. For me, it would be a greater priority to move forward with the 161 Westbridge Street enhancements than the Kaufman Park expansion items too. Maybe that's a discussion we need to have, is what are our priorities?
I agree with that. It's a gateway. And to kind of dovetail with what Jane was saying, it seems to me that instead of piecemealing it, we should have a cohesive study or plans. They're expensive. Perhaps we have one large one that looks at the city in its entirety in these different areas. And perhaps we do that after we get a little bit further down the line with our 2035 plan. Once we get back together and kind of create that vision. So yeah, I think I'm on the same page with Jane and the mayor and vice mayor. I don't think Kaufman Park is as important as some of these other areas, whether it's the promenade, moving that up a couple of years, or the 161 Bridge Street interchange.
I wouldn't want, I agree with that, but I also know that there's a lot of people waiting, and Matt, I think this is important to say. There's a lot of people been waiting for pickleball courts and tennis courts, and I don't think that we should stop all of that in order to do this plan, because this is something that's really important, this outside activity, especially now during the pandemic. So I think there's a balance here that we need to make. So I think that's an important point to make.
What I would recommend on this particular one, labeled Kaufman Park expansion, is that we would come back to you at your next work session with a breakdown of that, because this also includes some pretty important things like getting technology within the park that better supports the Irish Festival. And we've got pretty significant issue with that, as well as courts, as well as, I think there might have been a land acquisition piece in this that we could try to identify and back out, what that number looks like, and then and give you a little bit better breakdown of what we think those numbers are, and then you can look at it from that perspective. If that's okay with everyone.
So Matt, if our bottleneck or choke point, whatever phrase you want to use, is 2035 in this plan, the big projects that are impacting 2035, and I don't have the summary in front of me, probably aren't in the Parks Department. So maybe as we go through this, if we want to do some of this, and I think you're hearing some appetite for some prioritization in this area, what are those big things in 2035 that are causing that choke point?
The choke point is in 2023. The Kaufman Park expansion is certainly,
That's what I meant. Sorry.
sure,
Sorry.
certainly one of those projects in 2022 that may lend itself to some movement or some phasing or something of that nature. I think I'd probably like to take a second and probably email that to you after this, and really take the time to look at it and consult with division directors that might have those project specific knowledge regarding which ones are best served moving.
Okay, thanks. I think because that helps from a prioritization perspective, because we're looking at just one piece of it here, right? So maybe we can do a variety of things and still move some parks, but do some other things. So maybe it's not just on this page. So if there's interest from the rest of council to ask you to do that work, I think that would be a useful thing for us.
Yeah, the best place to start with what that list of likely suspects would be that slide where I identified the financially significant projects. Those are the ones that, at least the new ones that were added. And then of course you could look at projects that might have been approved in a prior CIP, but now have received maybe a lower priority than they did last year with new competing priorities this year. So I can get you a list of possible options.
I guess I want to make sure before we move on to understand. So when it comes to the potential next phase of Riverside Crossing Park, last year we had this discussion. Obviously, there was no appetite for it within last year's 5-year CIP. We brought it forward into the 5th year of this one, really to drive this very conversation about where should it be, and then given all the other priorities is why we put it in the the latter part. Obviously, there's, as you suggest, there may be various ways to approach that. I guess I want to make sure that I hear you loud and clear. So is council interested in that project being moved up closer, or keeping it in the out years, or running the scenarios? I just want to make sure I'm clear on what I'm hearing, because at this point, obviously I'm not, or I wouldn't be asking. So, and we had identified, a couple of weeks ago, that was going to be one of those major projects we'd have to figure out if you wanted to advance, and where would we put it in this 5-year time frame.
I personally am not in a big hurry to advance that portion, most notably because I think we will gain a lot of understanding of how the park will be used once we get what's under construction now open. That may change some of our thinking about how the balance of this comes together. So I think when what's under construction right now is finished, it's going to be a wonderful place for residents. And then maybe we just take our time and evaluate what's going to be the best, moving forward of the additional components we want there.
I guess I'm the somewhat opposite point of view, that if we don't begin to design what that could eventually look like to 2024, that's 4 years out. I mean, that will and is, I think, the central piece of property most used by our residents. I mean, it's incredibly popular and exciting. And it's not that it's not going to be in the pavilion. So I wouldn't, to your point, Chris, suggest that we start that work now. I think it's important to have it done. I would just like to see it brought forward so that we can figure out mathematically how we could do it. Because if we don't, I'm afraid if we program some of these other things mathematically, it's going to be real challenging for us to advance that. So sort of my request is, what are the possibilities to advance that while doing some other things? So that's my vote.
My thoughts are, I think it's interesting as the bridge has opened, how many kayakers there are. Who would have thought that the bridge would have created kayaking? So I'm sort of halfway between Kathy and Chris. I think there's some merit to getting it open and seeing how it's used, because like I said, I didn't anticipate kayakers to the number that we have. So that means that the river is going to be used more. So I think it's important that we move it up enough that we can get going on it as we see the interest and the demands and the way the park is used. But I'd hate to see it spread out so far that we don't finish the park in a timely manner. So I'm somewhere about looking at the possibilities of bringing it forward with Chris's suggestion that we see how the park is actually being used.
Matt, I'm a little bit confused. In my binder, it has the Riverside Crossing Park, the $6.5 million in 2022. And what I'm seeing in this screen is that $6.5 million in 2025.
That the binder that you're looking at is the staff proposed binder. So that request came to the city manager's office being proposed in 22. And then it was moved as part of this process of balancing the budget to 2025. So you're going to want to look at the second binder, not the first binder.
And the other reason I put it out in the years 4 and 5 was for the very reason I just said. It was not included in this 5-year CIP that we're in right now at all. So to bring it all the way up, I just wanted to have the discussion. And then as we went through prioritizing to try to get some of these other things done, that's where I felt it best fit, given a few things, given the other priorities as I perceive them and recommend them. That's first and foremost. Secondly, getting the existing park nearly done and then rolling into that as a future phase. And then third, really just bringing it in enough that you have this very discussion was really what I was for. And again, however it pans out, that's obviously your priority. We'll make all the adjustments, but I just wanted to have the conversation about it. So
What's the completion date on what's under construction right now? That's going to be in the spring opening, spring of 21.
now I thought it was a little later.
You'll see the upper plaza approaching completion towards the end of this year, early spring. And in fact, we will hopefully move that temporary access path across that upper plaza as early as this fall. And then the remaining balance, which is the lower plaza and the lawn space area, we are looking at probably late 2022 for that area to be open.
22, so not late next year, late the following year.
Correct. The upper plaza will likely be open, and then the remaining balance will be open probably 2022.
But the money's in 2021.
Yes, that money will be initiated January, as early as possible in January, to get the construction started for that lower plaza and the lawn space. And I would anticipate that being finished in 2022. The
Matt,
lion's share of that project is going on right now.
Matt, the promenade is the description of the promenade is what looks like, is it the swings along Riverside Drive? Is that the promenade we're talking about?
It's the swings and the seating areas with tables, pretty heavily landscaped with tiered steps down to the lawn area.
That won't be, okay, so that is not to be completed until 2025?
Correct.
Wow, that seems
Or
like
2026, if the dollars are in 2025. That was my concern.
That'd be an extensive project for completion.
Well, so are we not going to have any like tables or landscaping in the grassy area or the lower plazas, that area that?
No, in the lower plazas you will. The lower plaza will be 100% complete.
Okay.
With waterfalls and landscaping and trees and lighting. It's just the sidewalk adjacent to Riverside Drive that will remain a walking path adjacent to the lawn space, and we will contour it so that it's easily accessible by foot.
How about the walkway down to the river?
Pardon?
So that walkway down to the river.
That is part of that is part of this next phase once we get going in 2021.
All the way north?
All the way to John Shields Parkway, there will be shared use paths and lawn space.
No. I mean the walkway. I think there was a northern point of that park down to the river.
Yes, that will be part of that project.
Which project?
The 2021, the $4.5 million you see in 2021.
Okay.
That is part of the lower plaza and lawn area and shared use paths. And then it'll also include that roughed in path down to the water.
I think another way to say this is what's under construction now and currently budgeted is the entire park, with the exception of what we referred to as the promenade, which is the swings and seating that are along Riverside Drive itself. Is that correct, Matt?
Yes.
So that's a $7.7 million project for that seating and swings. That's it.
That is what we're estimating it to be, yes.
Well, then maybe I'm not as interested in moving that if that's all we're getting for $7 million.
Kathy, the reason that I was thinking along the lines that I was is, it would be interesting to see how, an arts festival would work, how some of those things were. And once we fix that along Riverside Drive, then we are kind of boxed in because those are, all fixed amenities. And it'll be interesting to see how people move through there, I think, before we, cast it in stone, if you will.
Yeah, if that's all we're getting for that 7 million, I agree. I thought this was the landscaping for the other park, the walkway down to the river. I thought some of that was what was out there. If that is not the case, then I'm not as interested. I misunderstood that. So I'm glad we're having the discussion because I agree. That's an awful lot of money, $1 million in design work.
Well, I will tell you, there's a portion of that that's allocated towards the west side of the river as well for some of the trail work that was anticipated through the natural areas and some of the reforestation and so forth underneath the bridge. Though I think the promenade itself was totaled about 4.8 million. So whatever the balance of that is, 1.7 million on the west side would be allocated towards part of that project.
And what I would suggest we do is when we come back next time, we'll break that west side stuff out. Because that may be the component you want to move up a little bit to make sure you're cleaning that side up. So we can come back to you with that. I mean, this was really looking at phasing aspects of it and what makes sense relative to phasing. So coming back to that west side was held off to come back a little bit later. So maybe breaking that down a little bit more.
That's a great idea, Dana. I think we all appreciate that.
Thank you. Yeah, some clarity there. And I appreciate it. And I appreciate this discussion because understanding what to move is important. So thank you.
It'd be great to have an update on the park, just so we can make these decisions.
Will do. Thank you.
All right, next we'll move on to police, which is entirely funded through capital improvement fund dollars. And if there are any questions on the police proposed projects, myself and police directors and staff are available.
I only had one question, and maybe this is in the oh, now I'm losing it here. Unmanned aerial vehicle. I guess that are those. I guess that's drones. I know, and Chief, in some conversations we had, you were sharing a little bit about how these can be incredibly helpful. I'll get there. Because the speed at which they could get to an accident or a rescue situation, et cetera, so forth. So is that what's here? And I see that isn't really until 2025. Is that because we have an adequate amount, or is it a budgeting, or what's the background on that? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I appreciate it. Yes, we're really just getting started with our drone program this year. So we have training for an additional, we have 2 pilots currently, and we have training for an additional, I believe, 10 pilots that'll happen here at the end of August. That's just programming money, presuming that we continue with the program to be able to either expand that program or to look at technology out in the future that could augment what we have currently.
So you're thinking you're going to learn, and then by 2025, is that what that line item is?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Chief, you know about the danger to those drones over the river, don't you? Have you heard? The eagles are taking them down, and we have eagles along the Scioto. So I'm just warning you that when you take your drone up there, it's going to get taken out by an eagle.
I did see that article over the weekend. We'll have to keep an eye out for that. I don't know how we do training exactly for that, but we'll have to.
There's a really big one north of the bridge. I'm just saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I would say this is my first rodeo going through this budget. And Chief, you are a lean machine. There's not a lot of money allocated to the police department. The question I have is on this mobile command vehicle. You've got the trailer now. I read the reason or the rationale for going to basically a mobile command center that is like more or less an RV, like the urban assault vehicle EM50 in Stripes. I don't know if you remember that movie, but anyway, it would seem to me that you're talking about partnerships. Can you explain what those partnerships would look like? Would the unit reside at the Dublin Police Department?
Our hope would be with whatever partnership we have that we would, yes, it would reside here. We have obviously a number of partners through NREC who it may be able to be a utility for or to service. However, that has to be staffed by somebody who can take it out to the scene. There needs to be a communications technician that's working out of the vehicle typically. So our hope would be that we would have some modicum of, well, or more than a little, control over the resource itself, but it's something that is large enough. Obviously, as you said, we don't have a lot of projects in our capital improvement budget. But this is one that's sizable. Frankly, we looked at a partnership last year, and I don't think we're quite there yet with Washington Township for a number of reasons. But it could be Washington Township. We're certainly open to other partners that we have through NREC if that is a way to make it work. But we pushed it out a little bit as from where we had it plugged into our CIP last year to just give us some time to figure out how to make that partnership work in the future.
It just seems to me that what you have now, we've been fortunate that you really haven't, to my knowledge, had to use it in a dire situation. It's terribly inefficient. And so, reading your write-up, the response times would be probably triple or quadrupled, if not more. So I guess my point is I would support moving that up, and I would support more money towards the police department.
All right. Moving on from police with regard to sewer projects. The Deer Run Sanitary Sewer Improvement Group Number 1 project was originally scheduled for construction in 2020, and debt was issued in 2020 for this project. The appropriation for this project will be reappropriated in the 2021 CIP, and the debt financing previously issued will be used. So that $3.5 million number there highlighted in yellow, we will utilize debt that was acquired in 2020 to fund that project. There will be no new debt issued for this project. There are, however, 4 additional projects utilizing debt funding in sanitary sewer improvements. There's $1.5 million in 2022 and 2024 for sewer lining and repairs that will be debt funded. The timing and amount of this debt issuance is identical to that in the previous CIP. There are 2 new projects, the Deer Run Sanitary Sewer Relief Sewer, Avery Road Relief Sewer, and Glick Road Relief Sewer will be debt funded in 2024 in the amount of $4.3 million and 2025 in the amount of $2 million. And those debt issuances and the associated debt service payments were factored into the recently completed water and sewer rate study analysis, and they are anticipated to be paid for with sewer revenues. The remainder of projects will be paid for out of the sewer fund, and were also programmed into that recent water and sewer fund analysis. And if there are any questions associated with sanitary sewer projects.
I just have a question, and that's for Megan or whoever's doing streets. I see on Riverview Street, there is looks like a major 36-inch diameter trunk sewer installation. And I know Riverview Street is like solid rock over there. Is that planned? But can you tell me a little bit about that? I hadn't heard anything about anything going on at Riverview Street. And I'll get questions about it. Anybody?
Yeah, this is Paul Hammersmith. Yeah, it's actually a capacity improvement that was a result of sewer modeling and studying in that area that we know we have limited capacity. So that's the purpose of that. And yeah, we're aware that there's rock along the river. And that'll be part of the design, is understanding how best to execute and install, a sewer in that area.
So will that go along the roadway, or you think it'll go along the bank, or what do you think?
So we don't even know that. We show it along South Riverview, but I mean, that'll be part of the design process, is to determine an alignment and a location for the sewer.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's much to be determined.
Okay.
At that point, when we get to that in the beyond category.
Okay. Thanks, Paul.
You're welcome.
Okay, next up, Stormwater Project.
Ned,
Yes.
just quickly, one of the things that I noticed I've just sort of been referring back to last year's or the current CIP that we're living in, in the outer years, that has grown pretty substantially, right? In the current CIP, the outer years grand total of projects is about 23 million. This is about 35 million. So they're just, that's substantially different. Is it just that it's rolling forward, or?
I would have to take a look at it, but there was also a significant amount of new projects added. We have $6 million in debt finance projects with the 2 relief sewers, and then $1.5 million in design. So that's 7.5 that would be showing in the out years that's showing in the current CIP. So that's at least 7 of the $10 million difference. So it might be reflected in the new projects, but I'd have to go back and take a little time to look at that in more detail.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Stormwater projects are currently funded entirely through the Capital Improvements Fund. As you can see, the funding for 21 through 24 is slightly higher at about $50,000 different. There's some new projects and some increases and decreases. This kind of division was significantly reorganized from the prior CIP, but the amount of funding dedicated towards stormwater remains similar to that approved in the previous CIP. So with that, we're available for questions.
Matt, on your annual pond aerator systems, looks like you've got what, $50,000 a year. How many ponds does that represent? Do we have, since it's a fixed number like that, I would imagine that would just be 1 or 2 ponds a year. Or maybe that question isn't for you. Maybe it's for Megan.
Yeah, it really does depend on the size of the pond and the surface area, or the water surface area, but we're estimating between 3 and 5 ponds per year. And the first couple of years will be focused on the Golf Club of Dublin ponds that have been identified for those aerators to help address the algae issues that have been there. But we anticipate the need continuing as we continue to see algae issues in other ponds as well. So that's why we decided to identify that as a specific line item. We in the past to this point have been pooling funds from other line items as the need arises, and the need just continues to grow. So that's why we decided to call it out as its own line item, so that folks can see that, yes, we are aware of the need, and yes, we're programming funds for the need.
And that'll probably be something that goes on without end. Probably that I would imagine that number is going to grow as the older units need maintenance and you're still adding new units. That number is probably going to double.
Yes, we agree.
And Megan, I wanted to ask you, we've used solar aerators and we've used hardwired aerators. And I'm hearing that some of the solar aerators are not performing as well as we liked. And I'm just wondering, as we spend money going forward, do you have an opinion about that?
Yeah, I think, it really depends on the availability of power in the area. But from what we've seen, specifically in Golf Club of Dublin, we do have varied reports on the success of those. I think some of us staff have taken a look at that, and it appears as if they are performing to some extent. Each pond's different, and, the condition of the pond is highly dependent upon heat and rain and the like. And we've also been working with Golf Club Dublin personnel to move those around in the ponds. Once an aerator is in one position, you'll see the area start clearing of algae, within a certain diameter of that aerator. So the Golf Club of Dublin personnel have been moving those around to help address the algae issues in other areas of the pond. But from our perspective, staff's perspective, they seem to be working quite well. I don't, Jay might want to add some comments to that as far as other ponds around the city goes.
Megan, I would also ask, have we, in the code update that planning is doing now, have we updated a code requirement for any body of water to have a power supply in proximity?
That would be a Jenny question. Jenny Roush.
I would doubt that we've done that.
Maybe put that on the
I can follow up with her.
never-ending list of things to do.
Jay, do you happen to have any thoughts on the performance of the solar versus the power aerators that I didn't mention?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. The only thing obviously is the solar does shut off in the evenings and then kicks back on in the mornings. And then just the dependability factor, you know, we've used the powered aerators for quite some time now. I think they may be having some minor issues with the solar power ones, but nothing they haven't been able to overcome. So I think it's well worth a try over there, given the scenarios we're working with. And so far, they do seem to be making an improvement.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, technology projects as listed here on this slide are entirely funded again through capital improvement fund dollars, and we're available for questions on technology projects.
I would only echo Kathy's earlier comments. Technology, it seems to me, should represent a larger piece of the pie. You know, given what we've seen here in the last 6 months, advancing so rapidly, and given that this is an endeavor we've been looking at for years, the smart city and all those other things. So for me, it's not so much the individual constituents of how the money is spent, but just that there should be more money on the table, and staff should direct how that extra money would be spent.
Thanks, Andy. And I would, you know, one of the concerns and opportunities that we've addressed as a council in our priorities is, you know, being the most connected. The Smart City Initiative over the last 2 years, that budget has not moved. It's been 200, 200, 200. And I don't know when the timing is us to go from pilot to big project, but we don't see it in this 5-year. And I know there would have to be some investments on our part. And so I would love to understand a bit more, and we don't have to do it tonight. I guess I'm talking to Doug tonight, but I would really love to know, I mean, where could we put some significant dollars to move some of this faster? And how can it always just be 200 a year, or whatever, to meet some of our goals? And so maybe it's just, we need some more understanding, or I should say, I need some more understanding about how we do this, or what are some possibilities. So I don't know if that's tonight or at a future point.
I would be very interested in that as well. We spent a lot of time with those folks that, you know, had the capability of routing out and putting fiber on, you know, streets and sidewalks and things like that. And I don't know if there's any grant matching monies available for that. And maybe this represents, you know, a match of a grant we hope to get. But I'd like to see some of that information too, Doug, when you had opportunity. Sure would be helpful.
I'll agree with the others. I think it's important, especially for someone who might not, I mean, I'm looking at all the technology asks, and I think we need translation. I need translation, Doug, from where we've been in the past to where the money's going that we kind of identified for our future growth, and how those dollars are taking us there, because it's hard for me to understand, because I'm not a technology geek, but it's hard for me to understand, you know, how new money is meeting the kind of intent and objectives that we're looking at. So that would be really helpful.
I would just add one thing is the future of work is now. So, you know, we're seeing that. And then the Irish Festival, this is just an example of technology. The Irish Festival, we've talked about that was basically like the magic bands that they have at Walt Disney. Where is that technology in this CIP, or is it? And what other creative things can the city of Dublin be doing to attract folks from New York or Boston or Chicago or other cities where there's a mass exodus, and keep them out of Montana and Wyoming? I'd rather have them here in Dublin.
So this is Doug. I guess I would respond that that is duly noted. And in our memo before you went on recess, we committed to coming back together with you and giving you a readout on the Most Connected project and what its future is. So I think we take your comments back and bring them to the table unless you had another specific question.
Hey, Doug, I brought this up in the past, and it goes back to Andy's comment. The reason London is successful as a financial center, it's the security of their fiber optic system. And I don't know how well we market that or how well that's used here as for drawing financial institutions into our city. So I've always been interested in that. So I don't know if there's an outreach where we could find out if this can help us. It helps us in so many other ways, business-wise and in the educational system. But I think, we were one of the first folks to get that thing going. And I just don't know how we can market it or utilize it to draw in the financial institutions that, as Andy just alluded to, are probably getting tired of Chicago, Portland, Seattle, and New York. So just a thought. Thanks.
Just on that note, on the European banking, Battelle brought that very technology over here and ran it on our system for a number of years to do testing. So our fiber optic system has been used as a beta testing site for many years, and that's probably been, I know it's before I became city manager that we did that with Battelle to test that very concept that you're talking about. I don't know that they ever commercialized it and took it anywhere, but we were the beta test for that. I guess the other thing I would just say to council in terms of you're not seeing large numbers in here is that we're trying to find ways to leverage the backbone. The big investment of the backbone's been made, and we're able to do a lot of beta testing off of what we already have. Plus you leverage in the nearly, I think Doug, you can correct me, it's $9 to $12 million investment in the 33 corridor, and working with the Council of Governments there to open up all of this for testing of new technologies is where it's really at. I think in Doug's presentation to you all before you went on your break was that he mentioned some of the measures that we would look at relative to what made us connected or not. And we do have some gaps in the city. But I think what we have to do first, and I'm just going to say this out loud because it's critical that we say it out loud, and that is we really need to look for those partners in the industry first. And that's what Doug has spent a lot of his time on, is trying to look for partnership in the industry. Because I will just say this, and council's heard me say this over the years, we have to try to do that first, because I'm afraid if we don't, and we try to move out too much on our own in the residential area, we'll be down at the State House trying to just stay alive in this business. Because I really believe the industry will put us out of it. So I think our first phase is we need to really work with the industry, which is not particularly, no one's really rushing to be a partner on it yet. I think I could see us issuing a request for information or request for proposal at a national level to try to see if we can find partners who will either existing providers here will respond to, and try to be a partner with us, or we find someone who will help us to fill a void or a gap where the current industry is not filling that gap. So I only say that because I just think we have to not just say it out loud and for everyone to hear, including the industry if they were watching. And that is, we want to be partners with them and try to figure out how to make us the most connected city. Absent that willingness to partner with us, then we got to go look at how do we fill those gaps on our own. And that's why we're not showing a big number here in here yet. I mean, I could throw a $10 or $20 million number in here and just we can have that discussion on how that happens if the city wants to take on that role of extending fiber optic to every neighborhood, because that's the kind of number that we pretty sure we know where we would be looking at to do that. But I don't think the solution to this is overbuilding everything that's already out there. It's trying to identify where all the gaps are that maybe we could become a good partner in trying to help fill those gaps. So we just don't have a good understanding under our belt on what those gaps are, where they are, and what the costs associated with that would be, because we have to go through a pretty lengthy discussion with the industry types and try to ask them and see if they'll cooperate in helping us to understand that and how we can fill it. So I know Doug has been working on that diligently, and that's just a little bit of a slow roll compared to what I would like it to have been, but I just think that's really the reality and where we are in trying to assess our situation. I want to thank you for being so supportive and out of the box on this. I mean, I brag all the time about how our city over the years and this city council gets it. You get the need for this, and we got to try to figure out what that means and how to fill it. So sorry for the speech, but I just want you to know that's why it feels like it's taken a while, because we got to try to, and I know I've said that probably for a year, but that's just how long it takes to try to wade through that.
So Dana, maybe to help move that forward, we agree, and I don't know what that number is, that we'll match some pilot number, $500,000, $1 million, whatever, to advance those pilots faster, to tell the partners that we are absolutely interested in, or hire some additional support to help say, let's put that pilot down and we'll put some money on that table, because you're right. We don't want to invest 10 or 20 million, but we can't just keep waiting until, somebody raises their hand. So are there opportunities with that RFP to put some money on the table and bring that back to us? Because as Andy said, the future is now. And, we were talking about what we're going to need to the home at the home, and what is a fair bandwidth. Are we going to be at a gig to the home here in a little while? I mean, if we really are going to live up to our vision of being the most connected, maybe we have to put some more shared pilot numbers on the table with some of these partners and say, we'll put some money in, you put some money in, let's figure it out. But I'm just worried that with keeping waiting is not going to get us to what we need to do. So,
well, I just want to be real clear.
There's a creative way to do that, Dana. I don't know.
No one's waiting. We're actively working it. And putting a number in here doesn't answer the question yet. I mean, we will have no problem bringing you a number when we get a better understanding of what that is. I mean, I could throw numbers in here, and to your point, and I agree with you completely. We've got, certainly this situation we're in now puts a fire under all of us to try to figure it out, and that's where we're going to have to get to. We're going to have to issue. I think we're facing an RFP soon if we don't get some of the level of response that we hope to get from potential partners. I'll just leave it at that. But I want you to understand, I hear you loud and clear, and understand your concern about that, and that's what we're trying to get to sooner rather than later.
Is there a possibility that that with the idea that you have about having the smart home in that space over on in the historic home or on Shire Rings, that a pilot program, this is just food for thought, that we can create some excitement by bringing forward our ideas about what a connected home in Dublin looks like, and then throwing some money out there to see if we can't partner with business, cable, whoever it is, to begin to create the vision. Doesn't mean that we're taking it into a whole neighborhood, but I guess what I'm saying is there's a way we can begin the excitement by utilizing some of these assets we have that we're going to be improving anyway. And your idea of putting that smart home on the out there for the public to see, maybe that's a discussion point we should be having too.
No, that's exactly the kind of a project we're headed towards. I think the budget supports that. So I think we are executing on that. I mean, could we execute faster? Maybe. But I have the other issues with our commitments to the golf course on that and how quick I can move them out and things like that get in the way, frankly. But we can try to take a look at how to expedite that as well. I mean, I appreciate the support of that concept because I think we all on staff anyway agree it could really be a unique asset to demonstrate some of the smaller level smart city, smart house type initiatives, as well as then trying to get the corridor advanced. And Kathy and Jane were both in that meeting last Friday and heard for themselves with the corridor, the status of that fiber build and how that's now, we're kind of at the cusp of that being activated at this point.
Right. And just one last thing that I wanted to ask Doug, I'm not seeing in here, and this is where the translation for me is important. We have talked about using IT for better public communication, more interactive websites, more ability to do real-time surveying, the reduction on, I don't want to say reduction on emails, the old-fashioned way of getting your opinion to council in the city, but more interactive ways like the Go app has done, which has been very popular. Those kind of technologies, I think, are really important as we go forward because people expect to be able to have real-time opinions out there. And we're seeing it even with Zoom now on Facebook. I'd like to get away from the use of Nextdoor, Facebook, SurveyMonkey. I'd like to have our own technologies that create these communication avenues. So I guess that's where I need help in understanding where we're going right now with our monies on technology.
Yeah, understood, Jane. And those amounts are not nearly as large as the fiber project. And so you're seeing those in the smart city money. This past year, we were able to do a chat bot. We have a Dublin Digital Identity project, and some of those things, they just have far lower costs because they can be developed in the cloud. So those are folded within, many of those are folded within, and we're going to be in a position to show the capabilities there. We want to partner with our social media things, but we have been developing new software, new connectivity with the public that we haven't shown you yet, but we were able to do much of that with last year's money. And this year we're continuing to develop that. So it's just not large enough to have its own line item.
Okay, great. Well, it sounds like you've got a lot to share with us because you've done a lot of exciting things. So you're going to have to teach us what's going on. Thanks, Doug.
Thank you.
And Dane, if I could just add one more thing before I'm on this subject is, in addition to the big players in the telecom world, you're seeing certainly advancements in the technology and with IBM, Google, Amazon, all of them that are also doing things here. And I don't know if it doesn't make sense for us to have, and maybe this is part of our 2035 kickoff conversations in the fall, have some of the, I'm going to say experts partner with Doug, and I'm sure Doug knows who these are, and it's Gartner or whoever it is, to come educate us a bit more on who those players are going to be, because everybody is noticing the world of work has changed. So there'll be more players and more spaces. So maybe in our help in getting to the next step in that vision, that we do some of that work. And again, I know Doug knows who those are, but to bring that back, because in addition to the telecom partners, there's other things going on out there that can get us to that future faster. So thanks.
Okay, moving on to transportation, bicycle, and pedestrian projects. Except for the projects noted above that are funded through TIF funding, transportation projects in this category are entirely funded through capital improvement dollars, and we're available to take any questions on the projects displayed here.
Just one quick comment about the tunnels. I'm not sure what the technical term is for them, but the tunnels that go under the streets like Dublin Road, Brand Road, some of those have mirrors and some don't. I would just encourage you folks to add mirrors in most of those tunnels. I've had some residents complain that, they've had either actual accidents or near misses with pedestrians, runners, and other things. I believe Dublin Road near Donegal Cliffs, that one in particular, is a problemed area. That's it.
I have a question that may be for Paul. Paul, a lot of areas around town, there's been a lot of settling and around some of the catch basins or some of the various structures that are actually within the shared use paths. In this shared use path maintenance, we have maintenance of the elevation maintenance of those that are currently in the shared use paths.
Yeah, those should be identified during the inspection that details what the scope of the maintenance is going to be. So if there's a catch basin or inlet or something that is settled, needs to be adjusted, I mean, that should be part of that project. And typically, I believe we've been correcting those as we come by those, when we're doing our maintenance program.
Okay, thank you.
I have a comment about CIP for bicycle path. With all the development that's been going on downtown in Bridge Park, the old bike path, and I wasn't able to pull it up quick enough, but the bike path routes that come from Dublin Road South into the city, which I love the fact that we're extending all the way down to Franz Road. I think that's great. They're getting used a lot, but they're moving on to the brick sidewalks of historic Dublin, and those aren't bike paths. They're just not. They're hard enough sometimes even to walk, let alone ride a bike on. So we need to take a look at the connectivity through the historic district and along 161 and all of those places where we move from a really nice shared use bike path to brick sidewalks or onto streets, to see if we can't either alter the pathways so that they're more user-friendly, safer for kids, that sort of thing. And I just bring this up because I know that we may have to add some shared use paths to make those connectivities. So I think it's worth a look at. It's just real hard to get through Old Dublin on a bike right now, unless we go through some back roads, which might just be fine. But I think we need to take a look at that.
Thank you, Jane. I agree with you. I was down there on my bike a couple times the last week or so, and it's just not possible. Even if you're the only person on the sidewalk in some of those areas, and I know it's incredibly tight. So some mechanism for helping folks maneuver, whether that's through an alley or whatever. It's just really difficult to do. So thank you for bringing that up.
I have one more thing that I think is really important too. As I was walking, actually Kathy and I were walking there. Our sidewalks are fairly narrow down there, and we have signage. And I'll tell you a place in particular, right at the northeast corner of 161 and High Street. There is a sign with two legs on it in front of a tree. As if you were coming across the bridge going west. That is the only sidewalk. You could not get a wheelchair or a stroller past that sign. We're starting to clutter our sidewalks a bit with stuff, signage, benches, all of that, which is great amenities, but we are reducing abilities for those with handicaps or with strollers and that sort of, or even with bikes to get by these structures. So I would just bring this up as a point that we need to pay attention to, because literally you could not get onto the bridge from High Street with that sign there. So we need to take a look at those things as we go forward.
Yeah, I've had a similar concern. I think a lot of it is the result of us trying to, we're actually allowing more signage, as you know, during this crisis, and also putting more of our own in. I also know there's like more and more stamped type stuff going on sidewalks, and everyone's trying to contribute
Yeah,
their, and when you add all that together, it kind of gets messy. So
right.
I'm hoping really that's more of a short-term issue than long-term, but
Well,
making clear pathways even during this time frame is important.
this one is a road sign that tells you whether you can turn left or right. It's not a new temporary sign, it's an actual permanent sign, and it probably needs to be moved. But it just brings up the point that it's very difficult for anybody who has a handicap to maneuver the sidewalks down there, and I think we just have to be really careful.
I made a note of it here. We'll check.
Thanks a lot, Dana.
Yeah, and this is Paul. We're aware of that sign. It's a lane assignment sign going westbound for Bridge Street. I mean, it's at the regulatory spot. We've struggled with it. I mean, short of eliminating the sign, there's not a good place for it. It is just a very difficult situation.
Yeah, well, I think it's worth moving because no one in a wheelchair or a stroller could get past it to use the bridge. You'd have to go on the street. Yeah.
The difficulty is there's not an alternative to move it short of putting it on the bridge itself or someplace. But we'll take a look and see what we could do if there's a possibility.
All right. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Next section is transportation, bridges, and culverts. Again, these projects are entirely funded through capital improvement fund dollars, and we're available for questions.
Our new bridge, our pedestrian bridge maintenance line item, is that under annual pedestrian bridge, or is that all of our walking bridges, or this new bridge that we have? Where's the dollars to maintain that?
So we don't anticipate any major capital funds being needed for the pedestrian bridge maintenance in the next 5 years. We do anticipate having some maintenance funds programmed in the operating budget, primarily for lighting, the lighting system maintenance and things like that.
Okay, so we'll see that when you bring that back around.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, transportation, streets, and parking. This section is rather large, so we split it up into several. This slide just addresses capital maintenance. Capital maintenance are funded through capital improvement fund dollars and a transfer from the state highway fund related to motor vehicle fuel or gas tax dollars. And that transfer was set at $1 million per year when the gas tax was raised last year. Due to the reduction in motor fuel usage this year and next year, we're anticipating that reduction, that transfer to actually be about $750,000 instead of $1 million, but that doesn't have any, that has not been anticipated to have any impact on the projects we have scheduled for those, for this year or for the following 5 years. And with that, we're available for any questions.
So this is so Megan, this is, my pet peeve. You might as well call me Stonewall Fox, right? Because I saw in here on AT 21E, you've got some money in here for retaining walls. I'm assuming that's for the historic stone walls of Dublin, or it's not. Parts of it are.
Parts of it are, yeah. This is to cover all structural retaining walls as well as decorative retaining walls throughout the city.
Okay, so do you think that the money here that's going forward will be able to restore many of the walls that we've had a lot of complaints on, that they're falling down? I'm talking the historic walls, because I know that the bridges and all those get annual maintenance, but we have delayed the reconstruction of the historic walls, which are now protected. Will those all be restored, do you think, in the next 5 years with the money that's set aside for that?
So we do have those on the list, and we also have on the list that we need to have a policy discussion with the Community Development Committee to discuss the scope and what our plan of attack is going to be on maintaining those historical stone walls. We had completed, and via planning as well as asset management, we had completed an inventory of all of those and located all of them. We have a few questions that we need to discuss and obtain answers and guidance on, which have to do with some of the walls go in and out of private and public property. And then also just the scope of the maintenance.
Okay.
So that's on the list to tackle and have a discussion with that committee in the near future. We just need to identify a date for that.
There needs to be a pretty good policy discussion here as to whether the city is going to enter onto private property and do this sort of work. And I just want to make sure the expectation is managed relative to what we can budget for, knowing what is public versus what is private.
Right.
I think if you add the private in, that number is going to go up quite a bit on the one hand, and on the second hand, will the landowner even let you? You might be surprised. Some may not let you touch them. So there's issues involved with that, which, we just need to have a discussion about and make sure we're tackling. But I certainly think we should have a program to try to at least start here, working on those that are truly public and that makes sense to tackle, that are public, and get those taken care of. And in the context of true preservation,
right,
make sure we're doing that properly, right? That we're not, kind of making them look too new. And so there's some delicacies with that as well.
Yeah, I think it's the walls have become an image that people identify with the city of Dublin, and I think it is definitely something we need to bring forward. And there's also safety concerns, especially along the quarry, along South High Street there. There was some work that was done to put in guardrails, and some of those walls fell in. And I mean, there's like a 30-40 foot drop there. I don't know if that's public or private. I just know that, we've got to start to address them. And so I just want to make sure that with their funding's in there, and if the funding's not in there, then let's get this to a committee and talk about it. Because I think it's real important. And I think most.
If I could real quick, Megan, we had that. Did we not have that scheduled for committee at one point? And it got.
We did, and then it got pushed aside for other higher priority discussions, and then COVID hit, and we just need to get it scheduled.
Okay. We'll work.
The one thing I would like to add is, we do get reports via Go Dublin and other mechanisms, and on a case-by-case basis of, a little section of wall that is toppled over, if it's really low, and if it's something that our in-house maintenance staff can address, we do send them out. If it is on public property, we do send them out occasionally to address isolated maintenance areas, and that, that work is covered under our operating budget.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Thanks for that.
I have a question relative to the Eiderman Ballantrae intersection paver repairs and replacement. Are we looking at some other materials that we can use, either stamp in place or something that can help? Just having been out there over the course of time, I think we've probably redone those every, 7 to 10 years. Are we going to try to do something different?
Actually, we haven't done anything other than, service and maintenance staff have gone out and adjusted some of the more problematic areas. We're going to take the same approach as we did at Eiderman and Trafalgar back in, I think, 2007, when we basically went in and put a base down. The difficulty with those intersections is they're on an aggregate base with a sand bedding, and that's why the brick just aren't staying put. So we're actually, when we do this, we put it out to put in a more stable base. And it'll probably be a concrete base. And that's what we did at Trafalgar. And then we actually replaced all the brick, because the other thing we found at Trafalgar was that the brick were two different thicknesses, the brown versus the green, which makes it very difficult to interface between the two colors to get them to be stable, especially if they're on sand. But to do it with a concrete base, it's really difficult to do. So it was just easier just to put in new brick that were a consistent thickness when we did that, several years ago. So we're actually working on that project right now to get out to bid here in the near future.
Great, thanks. And I know that right at the Golf Club of Dublin, where you turn in there, the three sides of that with the brick, that's been, seems like
Right.
It's always been moving around. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Can I ask you too, Paul, about the Shire Rings and Idaman Road roundabout? Can you talk about that one a minute? That's definitely on the books, right?
That's one that we said we'd monitor. If you're talking at the existing Shire Rings and Iderman intersection, it's now a 4-way stop.
Right.
Yeah. We really,
Go ahead.
yeah, we want to see once we get University Boulevard built and those intersections, continue to monitor what the volumes are and the need at that particular intersection. Our honest belief is that the 4-way intersection is probably going to suffice after University Boulevard's constructed, given the transfer in volume from Shire Rings over to University Boulevard. But we intend to keep a close eye on it.
Okay. I know in January when we had the Ballantrae folks out, we had talked to them that when we could, as we developed University Boulevard, that if we had the ability to relocate utilities and do some nice landscaping along there. So is that all still on the drawing board for consideration? And whenever, I know that as we do construction throughout the city, we try to get lines underground when we're tearing up streets. So can you give me an update on that a little bit?
We're working with AEP right now on distribution burial along Shire Rings. It's not going to occur between the service center and Iderman. We have asked, for cost on that so we can plan for the future. But we're also finding that, as we knew previously, the burial is very expensive. Just the portion on Shire Rings west of Avery over to basically like where University Boulevard would start is, I think, in the vicinity of $3 million.
You're talking the distribution lines are?
Yes.
The distribution lines. Okay.
The distribution lines. And part of it is that, there's single phase and then 3-phase in that area, which makes it even more expensive. It's not just burying kind of single phase, which is for residential usage, right, essentially.
Okay.
It's a rather sizable line in there.
Okay.
So.
Okay, great.
Yeah, but we always, it is a fair question. We always consider that with any of our transportation improvement projects to, make that enhancement at the same time. It makes the most sense in partnership with AEP where we can accomplish it.
Yeah, I would just encourage that we make sure that, some of the things that we did say that we would try to do in January when we had our meeting with them, that we continue to keep high on our priority list, that those are the things that as construction's going on, we take advantage of those opportunities.
We are having a continual dialogue with AEP, both transmission and distribution, about projects right along University Boulevard. Those are active conversations presently.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome.
Transportation, streets, and parking projects are the largest component of the city's CIP, as we saw in the pie chart earlier tonight. As noted here, many of these projects are funded through TIF revenues. Some projects of note from a financial perspective that appear on this particular slide: the Idaman Road relocation. This project is development dependent, and the 2020 appropriations related to that project will be unappropriated in the third quarter supplemental. So there will be no expenditures for that project in 2020. The design and site acquisition related to that project are budgeted in 2021 at a cost of $1.7 million. And the $4 million construction cost is then programmed in 2022. The funding for this project will come from the West Innovation TIF District. Additionally, the Shire Rings Road Realignment University Boulevard Phase 2 project is currently budgeted $9.6 million in the 2020 CIP. This appropriation will be reduced to $2 million in the third quarter supplemental. And this project is funded in part by a $6.5 million transfer from the general fund. So when this appropriation is reduced in 2020, the transfer from the general fund will also be reduced to $2 million. So the remainder of this project, or $10.2 million, will be appropriated in 2021. It's also important to note that in addition to the general fund transfer, this project is funded in part by 32.5% contributions from the developer. It also has $250,000 in Transportation Improvement District grant, as well as the $6 million general fund transfer. As I noted, the remaining projects in this slide are funded through TIF dollars, income tax dollars, or grant dollars, and we're available to answer any questions.
Matt, I just have one question about TIF dollars. With the economy and everything that's going on, are we at risk of not receiving certain TIF dollars, or are all our TIFs, those and who pay the TIFs, we feel pretty good about them, that they're dependable?
I do. Our income tax dollars have held relatively steady, which gives me confidence that our businesses located in our TIF districts are also holding steady. So I don't have a great deal of worry from that standpoint. Additionally, we don't program every dollar of a TIF. I mean, in our debt policy, we let that 10% buffer exist, and we backfill that with income tax dollars. So that's the first line of defense. And additionally, if a project is eligible for TIF funding, let's take the 33 State Route 161 Post Road interchange, for example. That's a large, regionally impactful project. If West Innovation TIF or Perimeter West were not able to fulfill its obligations, we would likely be able to turn to the Perimeter Center TIF to meet those TIF obligations. So there are multiple TIFs that can fund some of these larger projects. So the short answer to your question is I have concern, of course, because I'm concerned about everything at this time, but I don't spend a lot of time worrying about it.
Okay, so we can feel comfortable with that. Yeah, it was a question that needed to be answered in this economy when we have so much TIF dollars funding these improvements.
And it's really important to point out that TIF dollars are based on property values, and in economic downturns, property-based taxes are the most stable. So we don't in our operating budgets see a lot of property tax revenue. I mean, most of the property tax revenue, as we know, goes to the schools and the townships. But with regard to our capital budget, one of the reasons you're not seeing the impact of COVID on this budget is, one, we're not seeing the impact on our income taxes, which is great. But also it's structured such that its backbone is really property-based taxes. Mm-hmm. And that gives it a stability that does not exist in the operating budget.
Great. Thanks for explaining that, especially for people who are watching. That's important to note.
Pat, I have a question about the ET092, ET518. It says see note B below, post preserve access modification TIF. I don't have any notes below.
I'll follow up on what that note should be. I bet it's in a binder somewhere, but I don't see it on this slide.
I don't have it in the binder that I picked up either. So if you could.
Okay.
It's on the electronic version. It's on the electronic version. Note B says dependent on development and developer participation. I don't know, Matt, if that helps.
No, I think that does help. That would be what the note is. Those, I'd look to our engineers to kind of maybe spread some more information on what that is.
It's Paul again. The reason for that note was that previously, when the interchange wasn't moving forward, we knew that eventually the Gordon property would develop and that the street layout would accommodate this post-preserve access modification. Well, as now the interchange project is progressing, that window's closing in terms of development. Now, that property has been in front of Planning and Zoning Commission for a proposal. It didn't meet with success there. So we're hopeful that, if that project the property develops, then, we won't have to have this access to be part of the interchange improvement itself, and be 100% city funded.
Hey, Paul, if that is residential, then non-TIFable, correct?
That would be a Matt question.
the TIF dollars can benefit any area as long as they benefit the parcels in the TIF. So if that modification benefits the commercial property down the road from that roundabout, it's likely that those would be permissible. I think it would be, we'd have to look at the project specific at that point.
I had a question about the 089 one, the roundabout at Highland Croy and McDrick. In 2023, I'm trying to think from last year, is that changed? Is that new?
No, I don't think that time frame's different. That's the same as what was in last year's proposal, I believe.
It is.
Mhm.
So if we look at, back to our choke point on 2023, there's just a lot of activity in 2023, and then hardly anything in 24 and 25 on this particular, and I guess maybe it's the set of projects, but will realistically all of this stuff happen in the 21, 22, and 23 time period, or really is there a smoothing of that makes some of this choke points easier? Just seems to all end in 2023.
One comment on the Highland Croy McKittrick Road roundabout, we recently implemented the four-way stop improvement at that location. So we'll be monitoring the effectiveness of that four-way stop and assessing the safety at that intersection. So as we monitor that, kind of similar but different to the Shire Rings Eiderman roundabout, we'll monitor the effectiveness of that interim improvement, monitor the crash data and all that, and determine when the appropriate time, or if the appropriate time comes, that the further roundabout improvement is necessary or desired. So that improvement being identified in 2023 could be adjusted depending what we see as far as the effectiveness of the interim improvement.
I have a question about ET 181, the Franklin Street improvements. I understand that we're going to be, extending the street north into the historic district. We've had some discussion about the Darby lot maybe being renovated to a point that it becomes a flexible community space in the area of that part of the historic district. And now we've kind of seen with the pandemic that we're putting like picnic areas. Is it possible that we might think about, as we do the Franklin Street improvements, running electric and that sort of thing, and making that a usable community space for farmers markets while we're tearing up, Franklin Street to go north almost right into the Darby lot? I'd like to have that considered as a possibility.
So I think, Jane, you're referring to ET 204, which is the Franklin Street extension.
Oh, I'm
Yeah,
looking at the improvements. Okay, I'm sorry,
Yep.
You're right. I'm looking at the wrong one.
Right. Easy to do because it probably should say South Franklin Street improvements versus North Franklin
Okay.
Street extension.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's an opportunity, and we're seeing how we're kind of looking for spaces like that. There's so much excitement with the ability to close Longshore and have the farmers market and all that kind of thing, but there's no gathering space large like that on the other side of the river. And I think that this is an opportunity that we need to take a look at as a usable space. And we need electric. We need electric there, and we're already going to be right next door working on it. So I'd like that to be considered as an addition.
I would add to that water.
Water is good. I like that, Chris. Add water. Yeah. Yeah, whatever it takes to make that a really usable community space, flexible. It can be parking lot when we're not using it, or it could be picnic, or it can be farmer's market or an art exhibition. It could be a lot of things. Do I get a thumbs up from anybody on that? Thank you.
I guess I would like to hear council's interest in that. I mean, I took a note here to look at it. If that's the idea, is to create more event space, and the only reason I raise it is because in effect, you take the parking lot out of service. And I know we've got a $10 million parking garage the city does sitting right next to it, but taking that parking lot out of service, as long as we're all know we're going to take it out of service. And
Does it have to be taken out of service, Dana? Can it be flexible?
if you're going to do activities in it, I think you're going to have to take it out of service. While
Well, yeah, but I mean, majority of the time it'll be in service, but there'll be occasional times it'll be out of service. I'm just saying.
What kind of dialogue is a historic district task force having over that right now? I mean, I totally get the idea of doing it, so I'd be all about it. It's just, you know, is there the stomach to take that out of service on occasion to do that? I only ask that somewhat sarcastically because we've tried it before and it's been rough to do. And as long as the task force and the business community is coming along with that idea, then I think it's a great thing to do. But let's not put money into something that not everybody's on board with. And I think that's the thing we need to make sure we're vetting out, you know, as part of the task force. So I would be hopeful everyone would be all about it.
Yeah, I definitely think it should go before the task force. I mean, it's something to talk about, and we can definitely talk to Scott and the chamber down there and the Historic Dublin Business Association and just run it by them. I mean, it wouldn't take much to hear what they have to say in the next month or so before we make some adjustments to this. I'm sure I'll take a walk and ask some questions too.
Yeah, and by the way, there's nothing that really prevents that from happening now.
Yeah.
If there's events that they want to do. I mean,
right.
Events all the time and bring in electric, water, and everything else. I understand the permanency of that, which would be helpful. I totally get that. And I think that's a great idea, but nothing says we couldn't do that today if we needed to.
Okay. Yeah.
I would be very supportive of that. I've talked with residents about that over the years, probably 4 or 5 different occasions. And I think for me, that was the push of getting Franklin Street Extension done, is to really make that space more meaningful and circulate better and all of that. So I'm very much in favor of it.
I would too. I agree.
Me too.
How about putting a community shelter over it?
A community shelter or pavilion, a gathering space like that.
I meant pavilion is the word I was looking for.
Yeah, I mean, I think that has possibilities. You could have music, you could have all kinds of things in there. I think it's a great space. It's a great space. I think it has a lot of opportunities to bring a lot of business into that historic district.
Would council be interested in at least, and maybe it doesn't make it into, and I get the electric extension as part of the road extension, and that's not immediate anyway, but perhaps that idea being vetted out by the Historic District Task Force, or something like that.
Yes, yeah, I think it should be brought for them, including the pavilion idea.
For me, I don't necessarily disagree with the idea. I always struggle with this when we do the CIP because I think we should be setting policy, and the CIP reflects the policies we've already set, as opposed to the CIP setting policy and then we adapt to it. You know, we revisit this every year for that kind of specific reason, that things come up and we look into them and we have more information. I just can't imagine that our staff, with everything else that they have to do for this CIP, that in the next month, we're going to be able to put a plan or a program together that I would say, yep, I think that's a good idea and I'll vote for it in the next 30 days. I'm not saying that maybe it is a thing that should be done within the next year. I just think we're kind of turning the process on its head. And I think although Jane, I think it's a great idea, I think we should establish the policy and then fit it into the CIP as opposed to the other way around. That's my 2 cents.
If I could, I agree with that completely, Greg. And the reason I suggest that going to the task force was to be considered as part of their study process. I don't know if they're thinking that way about that lot, or if they consider that lot to be totally something that can't be considered for that. I'm not sure where their collective mentality on whether that lot is, for lack of a better word, sacred or not, or whether it could be purposed differently. Maybe that's the policy discussion that could come back to council some other time in the future as part of their assessment.
So just to clarify something, because Greg, you bring up a good point. When we look at the CIP and there's things that we've talked about in the past, yet maybe hadn't shown up on this. So what do? Look at holding a placeholder? It's just a note that you make, and then when the final comes down, if you get a heads up on something that looked like it was a project that we discussed, but we just didn't find a space for it here, how does it find its way into the 5-year CIP then?
Well, there have been big projects that not only, I don't see the CIP as the next 5 years of prioritization, that's something that's the 6 year out is always going to be at least 5 to 6 years out. There have been things that have happened where we've adjusted and moved things in a CIP from not even being on it to next year. And that's been known to happen. I'm just suggesting that I don't know. Maybe this conversation and then raising that issue with the task force, as Dana suggests, is the way to go. When we talk about things, our staff tends to be pretty reactive, and they end up on our list of agenda items to talk about as we go forward. I know that, and we all know, there are a few business owners down there that if we start talking about taking away parking for any period of time, they would say, "Are you out of your minds? You just built a parking garage we've been screaming about for generations." So I'm just saying that I think that there is a lot of conversation to have, and maybe, that the staff now realizes or knows, or it's been pointed out that there is support on council for the policy. Maybe we now begin to pursue that policy.
Okay, yeah.
Even if it's like through, what do you call that we do in the February or March, goal setting and all that sort of thing. I think it's a really a fantastic idea. And I don't know how you implement it. I don't know what it would cost. And I don't know, as Chris always points out, there are always the law of unintended consequences. We do that, we are going to be creating problems we don't intend to. And if we think it through ahead of time, we can maybe save ourselves some headaches down the road. But I do think it is a really important thing. I think it's a great idea. Farmers markets are huge. And it could very well be exactly the right place to be. I just think maybe talking more about it is a better way than just putting it in here, because then that really, you start putting your money where your mouth is when you start putting dollars to it.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. And
that's just me, Jane. I mean, I'm only one person.
It's learning the process of how you go about doing this. I think for me, it's just bringing up something that we've talked about, making sure that it doesn't get lost as we talk about capital improvement projects. But I agree. And I think Dana's brought it up. I think we need to run it by the folks that are going to get the most benefit, or maybe becomes a burden to. But so whatever it takes to have that conversation. And then, as Chris says, you can always add, scooch things around. And yeah, so I appreciate you bringing that up, Greg, because I think those are important points to learn as we go. And it helps me a lot too.
I agree with Greg, and I got to say that having spent 2.5 years down there with the folks discussing parking, it's imperative that we find out if they want to give that up for this kind of idea. Not that the idea is good or bad, but it's really important to them. And I just hope they get involved in it, because there's a lot down there about parking.
I think that is the point of Dana bringing it up with the task force and the folks who are down there and work down there and live down there on a regular basis. I think that is the whole point, is to talk about it with them and see what that level of interest is. And before we put any numbers to it and put it in here, because that would be the right way to do it. So I'm definitely supportive of bringing it to that group of people and hearing what they have to say, because they might be like, "Oh no," to Greg's point, they'd be like, "No, don't do that." But they might love it. So we just have to have the conversation. And as Jane always loves to say, is that collaboration.
There you go. Yep. Thank you, Christina.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
And the other thing that we're going to learn, I think, as people come out of this pandemic situation, is people quite enjoy eating outside and being outside. And so we've rediscovered some of that opportunity as well. So I think it will be an interesting discussion go forward, and see what all the restaurateurs are thinking about.
Hey, Matt, I think you're still muted.
Sure am. Thank you, Mayor. This slide displays the remaining transportation, streets, and parking projects. The projects of note from a financial perspective on this slide. The Highland Croy Road Corridor Improvements Project has a significant funding gap as the city looks for partners to begin that project. If funding partners do not develop, that project is unlikely to proceed on the timeline indicated on this slide. We have it beginning in 2021. Additionally, the Avery Shire Rings Road intersection improvement has an appropriation of $8.5 million in 2020, utilizing income tax dollars as its funding source. In the third quarter supplemental, we will reduce this project's budget to $2 million in 2020. The remaining $7 million will be appropriated in the 21 CIP, utilizing income tax dollars and a $2.5 million 629 roadwork development grant from the state of Ohio as funding sources. The total project cost is budgeted to be just over $9 million. The remaining projects on this slide are funded through income tax dollars and were available for questions.
Well, doesn't sound like there's questions on that section.
Okay.
Okay. Final slide of the evening, water projects. The projects on this slide are entirely cash funded through water fund dollars, and we're available for questions on the water projects.
And that cost analysis study for the water sewer, have we done anything of what that would do to this?
These project costs were utilized in developing that study. And I believe the study was distributed to council members last week, but the draft version of it basically recommends inflationary increases in the next 5-year period, which is, I think, probably what you would expect a study to recommend. So those costs and these costs are aligned with that recommendation.
But do we have a number on what the funding, we have funding differences here, how that would close that funding difference gap if we were to adopt the water sewer rate potential increases?
We can probably develop that number. One of the issues with the water fund and this particular 5-year plan is we have a significant fund balance in the water fund. And then year 2020, 2022, 2024, those $600,000 projects are cash funded. And we don't necessarily have the annual revenue to sustain that type of project. But you can see then the revenue does that, those costs don't occur in 21, 23, and 25. So it kind of balances out to a certain extent. So it's difficult to project kind of a flat revenue stream with a very inconsistent cost curve. You would see a much more flat cost curve if we were to say debt finance all of those. If we were to take, the debt financing costs of those projects and put them into our revenue stream, it would be significantly less than the cash funded cost, obviously, and the revenues would be enough to cover that. So it's I guess that's a long way of saying they match up in the long term. In the short term, it looks very choppy because we're cash funding these projects. If it is our intention to continue cash funding indefinitely and grow the fund balance, we're going to have a discussion about what those revenue recommendations need to be beyond this 5-year period.
And what does this do to the resolution that had been passed, or the policy that had been adopted, I suppose, of the water line extensions on the east side of the river? I see a lot of zeros in all 5 years. Does that change those policy decisions that were made, or what happens with
I think I'd ask for Paul or Megan to weigh in on that.
The policy remains in effect, as is. The policy is also subject to funding availability. So the decision had been made a couple of years ago as we were starting to implement the extensions, that we would take a look and see how the rate study went and then determine, how best to proceed with the implementation of the extensions for construction at that point. Not sure if that answered the question.
When would we anticipate completion of the extensions to unserved areas of the city?
So we had a concept plan that was about a 15-year plan at one point, and that had been squeezed down from a much longer plan during the policy development. We are a few years at this point. We've implemented a couple, and we are a few years behind at this point, but we're still evaluating the best opportunity to implement each of them. So Paul, do you have any idea what the extended concept plan looks like at this point for completion? It'll be subject to funding for the entire length of the implementation.
Right, and we'd need to go back and revisit that. We want to get through this rate study piece, and just as I think Matt indicated, then now if we want to, expand the capital side and take those zeros into real numbers, we'll have to then evaluate that. And then I also say that one of the things that we've talked about at the staff level is kind of the level of connection to these water and sewer extension projects, and evaluating their success based on the connections we've gotten. It probably hasn't been as much as we would have expected in terms of residents connecting. And there's some issues with that, especially on the water side. City of Columbus doesn't like to put in water mains where we don't have any services off of them, where we don't have any circulation. And that's particularly true on like a dead end water main versus one that's tied and looped through the system where we do get, circulation. So that's another component of this whole extension policy and program.
Paul, if I could weigh in, that reminded me, and I appreciate you brought up that last point. I think we had originally shown some dollars in here for some of those projects, but because we were not anticipating people wanting to hook up and the very issue of water lines laying dormant, we backed those numbers out at one point. I remember us having a discussion on that. And I think that does become problematic in the extension program, is particularly with water, is if people aren't expressing an interest in wanting to connect up and abandon their well, or giving us an idea that they want to connect up, to Paul's point, you can't extend out there. What I recommend is we come back to you and maybe talk next time, and we'll talk about that very scenario, because unless I'm misspeaking, Paul, there was a specific scenario on that, was there not?
Yeah, that's true. Like for instance, over at Bright Road, and it comes right down to even putting in the services themselves. We actually got commitment letters from residents that said, yes, we will connect to the system once it's available. It was only under that condition that we could extend services over to their property. If we didn't get that sort of commitment, we did not put in a service line under the road. Now, we did put in conduits to be able to push those under the road, but the service itself and the tap is not in the main because of that issue of not wanting to have a service sitting there with water that's not being used. So you're right, Dana. Maybe that's more detail than necessary, but.
Oh, Dana, Megan, I appreciate all those points. They're extremely valid. My concern all along has been water quality, and having residents come at some point in time and they have a home that does not have water suitable to drink. And I think that time is coming sooner rather than later in terms of development, compromise of the wells. And I hear you. It all makes sense. But that's not a headline I want. A bunch of our residents can't drink from their faucet. So I would encourage us to continue pushing on this as hard as we can. Obviously, to Megan's point, we can only do what funds are available, but this would be one I would at least prioritize in terms of number of residential served or something like that, because wells are being compromised at a very rapid rate. So, but thanks. I don't disagree with anything you said, but I would say that I want to lean in this still.
And we will be submitting our annual extension policy report along with the first reading of the CIP in the very near future. And it'll talk about some of these specific situations. Another example is with the sanitary. We had one extension that would require an expensive lift station. So the discussion in that case was, do we, expend the funds to install and build this expensive lift station when we know there's nobody along that line that plans to connect at this point? Meanwhile, we have a situation arising up on Glen Cree that would seem to have us reprioritize that extension to those residents that could potentially be impacted by the AEP work up in that area. So it's a constant discussion and reprioritization effort each year.
I certainly do appreciate that, and I appreciate the thought. And I would not be surprised if there were some grants and things coming available. As more and more well contamination happened around the state, there might be some dollars available that could help us out with some of that too. Okay, Matt, is that the conclusion? I saw you stopped sharing your slides, so you're finished. Is that correct? Okay. Dana, do you have anything else for us this evening?
We do not. It's been a great session. Great questions and ideas and thoughts. Really appreciate it. I've been trying to take copious notes. We'll see just how much fun everybody makes of me when I share this out with staff. But we'll focus then on September 8th to respond to a lot of the questions and things that you brought up and some of the scenarios you've asked us to run. And we'll bring all that back to you on September the 8th and see how that goes. If to the extent that we can get communication out to you before then, we certainly will do that as well. If you have other thoughts or things that come to mind, between now and then, please don't hesitate to advance those to us, so that can also be considered in the mix here. And of course, whatever those might be, we'll bring them out for the record, when we get together again. So great meeting. I appreciate your time and all the input. Very helpful.
Hey, Dana or Matt, before we go, could I add two other general sort of questions that we don't have to address them tonight, but we could do next time? And that is, given the realities with the bed tax fund and everything that funds, are we going to talk about that and the allocation of potential monies when we talk about operating? Or when are we going to have that discussion? Because it'll affect, some dollars have to be decided. So
I don't know what I'm going to do that, but I think essentially, Matt, a lot of that pretty much from the capital side of that fund got deferred as part of the capital, as far as the finance committee review. When it comes to the operating budget, we'll definitely give you a preview of that fund and how it's impacted operationally. I think we need to also talk quite a bit about recreation fund as well. Any other thoughts?
We'll do that then, because I know they're not going to make up these differences, and we're going to have to. Okay, so then we'll make that. And then my other final question is about if there's a withholding tax schedule change, which I know is the conversation nationally and then potentially state. Could you share with us sort of next time what that could potentially mean towards sort of revenue or funding, Matt? I'm not looking for an answer for that night, but I know there's some discussions about that and what impact that would have. So I'll just add those two to the list for next time. So thanks.
Sure can. Thank you.
And Dana, will there be another binder coming, or no more binders coming? Matt says.
Matt was.
I think I missed the binder thing, because I picked up a binder and received a note that day. So I think I have the wrong binder.
Okay. Let us try to sort that out for you. I want to make sure you have that. I think there's an electronic version out there. Let's make sure you've got the right binder in hand.
I think there was a binder that was the staff proposed or staff request, and there must have been another binder that came the day maybe in the afternoon or the morning that I was there. So,
The,
but
the correct binder has 15 tabs, I believe. The first binder had 12 tabs. So that's how I tell the difference, because they look identical, more or less identical otherwise.
okay, great. Okay, well, we'll just look for those, the next tranche of materials that we need and make sure that we have the right thing. Okay, anybody else have anything for the good of the order?
I just want to thank staff. This was an amazing explanation of all your requests. So I think it was quite a lot of work and I appreciate it. It really helped.
Thank
Something tells me Matt really likes the stuff. Good job, Matt.
Why you do what you do will determine how long you do it and how well you do it. So he does it, he's been doing it for a long time and does it really well. So he must like it a bunch. Okay, well, if there's nothing further with that, we will stand adjourned. You all enjoy the rest of your evening.